Good morning. We've got the children to the state where they've got motor sensory integration. However, there are some of the children you're working with who have not. And a very important issue you have to think about is trauma and its impact on motor sensory integration. Because the child doesn't want to feel pain and they're going to fight to the bringing together of their senses. They don't do it consciously, they have no control. So we need to understand that. So when we screen for sound processing, we can see trauma. And what happens in a human is they close down. If you go and role play and you imagine yourself hiding, really frightened for your life, you can feel your inner ear clenching and closing down your sound processing. This impacts on all senses. Your primitive reflexes, if you are in trauma or you're experiencing a very big trauma very suddenly, can re-emerge. So big trauma can cause primitive reflexes to come back. So it's worth doing primitive reflex exercises throughout people's lives to just keep integrating them back again. Your long polyvagal nerve clenches up. You can't help it. The tension comes in all your nerves, everything's set up for fight, flight, freeze, and you can get trapped in that. Problem with humans is we overthink and we hold trauma. As I said, sound can be suppressed, but also that can narrow your vision. You may lose your peripheral vision. You may actually, just to survive, be restricting your vision to a bit of a tunnel. You see that with children who want to keep their hoods up, people who want to be down. It's they're reducing their visual range, and that can also affect your perception of colour. So your body closes down. It's an unconscious reaction, and you need to think about ways of getting it up. And of course, if you think about the way the inner ear works, if sound is your first alarm system, it very quickly impacts on all the other systems. It's a very cunning device for you to survive. If you're captured by another tribe, you're in danger, you need to survive, but you have to keep kind of functioning, put one arm in front of the other. But you've closed down. You can do what's necessary to survive in a hostile environment. But it's not good development. And when you do a sound processing profile, you can see incredibly damaged. You can see the bone conduction, the red line, particularly the body is closing down, the body tightens up, and it all holds the trauma. And we have to work to release that trauma. Sound therapy is a very good way of doing it because you're agitating the sound and that releases it. And you can agitate the sound on the spine as well as through the ears. So there's all sorts of ways you can release trauma. One of the things you need to be conscious of is if a child is not in a safe place, don't start. If a child is not safe, they are protecting themselves. The child has to be in a safe place before you do anything. Safety is important because you can't try and force open someone's reflex system. What the children will do is physically reject it. So say, I'm not safe and I'm not going to do it. And it's really hard. And even when you know you're in a safe place, some children are going to reject for a bit until, okay, we've gone slowly and got there. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a very useful tool when you're thinking about trauma. All aspects of Maslow's hierarchy, missing bits can cause people to go into trauma. You know yourselves, if you are, any human is missing basic physiological needs for a long term, it can just wear them down and traumatize them. If you feel threatened, lack of safety, you're going to get into a state over a long term. If you feel outside and always isolated, then you are going to get traumatized. Humans have a very strong need to be part of the group. If you are constantly humiliated, either at school or at work, you will go into a state of trauma, you'll close down to survive. And if you can't realise your goals, you just drop down, you go onto a low pilot. Different things impact differently. We can recover from a lot of it, but some really extreme trauma, it takes a lot longer. And I would say if you're working with children in care or children from violent backgrounds, you need to be thinking we're going to be working all the way through till post-puberty. That child has got a heck of a lot of trauma to be released. If we're not careful, they'll never come out of it. And that is unfortunate. So the causes of trauma in children can be pretty much anything, but I would say every child in care, by the very nature of the fact they've been taken from one family situation to another. Care in Britain, from what I've seen, can be one care home to another, to another, to another. We haven't got a system that ensures that the child goes to a situation which is secure. We haven't got a system that says actually they're coming out of such a toxic environment, we need to really surround them with super security. It's very rare, and we're not doing anywhere near enough. Children in chaotic and unsafe homes, though I would say some chaotic homes can be very, very loving, but when it's chaos and violence and drugs and gangs, the children can find themselves having to close down to survive, having to close down and become quite feral just to get food. Children with attachment issues. So that can be that the mother and child never bond, or that the child is away from the mother for an extended period and really doesn't feel secure in the relationship with the mother. Children under 7 don't know where they are in space. They're very dependent on their mother for that reassurance. And so it's really important that we are much more conscious of supporting the child's transition from mother to the community, particularly as we push them to go into nursery, etc., at a very young age. And for some children, it really doesn't work. My suspicion is that where you've got really big problems, it's the primitive reflexes haven't got integrated. The child feels spectacularly insecure because they're still functioning as a baby, and they need to get their primitive reflexes integrated. They need to have some sort of sense of just where their body is. Families that have had a death, a sibling dies, a parent, obviously it's going to have a devastating effect on the family, and the child and the parent, anybody that's remaining, can find themselves in trauma. Socioeconomic insecurity. Here we are in the middle of COVID. It is horrendous. And we have seen families lose their homes. We have seen families go from employed to dependent on food banks. We are seeing people losing all their savings. Society feels very unstable. And so if you're a family that's found yourself in temporary accommodation, having to share kitchens and bathrooms with other families, you can feel very vulnerable. Over-controlling parents, violent parents, far too strict with discipline, etc. You see children close down if you're too critical. And it is hard. And I often say to parents, if you're getting frustrated, go out for a walk. And things like abuse and bullying and exclusion from school all cause children to close down. And of course, things like traumatic births. The child arrives traumatized, mum's traumatized, everyone's feeling a bit battered. Things like sound therapy, the primitive reflexes, the exercise did on day 2, squash frog, they can all release trauma. And we all ought to be learning how to do exercises like yoga and so on, like attunement, breathing, heart rate variance, to minimize trauma, to bring ourselves to calm. So trauma needs understanding. We need to understand it's in the body and it needs to come out. We also need to understand that humans don't need to be defined by it. When I was at school, my headmistress was very fond of saying that the sins of the father should be upon the children of the third and the fourth generation. So telling us that our problems, that we were wicked, would go down our families for at least another 3 generations. That's a bit depressing. It just isn't true. We can all choose to make our bodies more relaxed. We can choose to do exercises that release reflexes. We can choose to do sound therapy. We can choose to do body therapy. Lots of things we can do to get the body to release trauma. We can choose to do things like look at family histories. So trauma can be intergenerational. And when I work with very damaged children, we often make a family tree. It's important we understand that mum was as much a victim as grandma. Grandma was a victim as great grandma. The family have gone through generations of war, of poverty, of being shipped out to Australia to populate whatever, going into orphanages, of all sorts of things, which have meant that everyone has struggled to develop good relationships. Everyone's struggled to be a good parent. They're not bad people. They love the baby, they love the child. They got it wrong, but they didn't do that intentionally. And that understanding that is part of coming out of trauma. So we can choose to move our bodies. We can choose to come out of it. Trauma does keep people hyper alert, and that can impact on their decision making because you haven't got that motor sensory integration. Also, people become very paranoid and prone to extremism. So we want people to be in the group. If you want to stop extremism, you do it by bringing people in, bringing people to calm, making people part of the group. So prison and punishing people for being traumatized and extremists isn't quite right. We need therapies. We need to bring them in. We need to look at their sound processing. We need to look at their family histories. It is not exciting, and it doesn't sound like a James Bond movie, but it is what is going to resolve the person's trauma. So trauma is really important. Don't attack it if the person's not safe. Making the person safe is the first step. Thank you for listening, and I will see you again tomorrow. Goodbye.